warm welcome to our subscriber interview. We are talking with Christopher Knowles, the author of Our Gods Wear Spandex, The Secret History of Comic Book Heroes. And we just spent about an hour in the first segment talking about the history, but also about the modern world and the impacts that these ancient stories and have on our world today. And what I want to ask Christopher here in our next in this segment here is about people that actually are working within the comic book industry, and if it's possible, to draw some kind of picture for us here, pun intended, I guess. But are people working within the comic book industry, do you feel that they are steeped in that sense in the occult? The people that you have been working with, are they as aware as you are in regards to the symbolism and the origins of the stories?
Certain people are and certain people aren't. But it is growing all the time. Alan Moore sort of kicked it all off. He did a series called From Hell, which was about Jack the Ripper. And he followed Stephen Knight's book, which sort of painted it as a Masonic conspiracy, a Masonic occult ritual. And that sort of led him into dealing with magic and these kind of themes. And he said the impetus was that somebody came up to him and asked him, where do you get your stories from? Mm. And he realized that he didn't know where they came from. And he wondered if there was this world of the imagination, that there was this other dimension, this other space that ideas sort of came into this world from, which was a really interesting way of looking at it. But that, he would develop in this approach to the point that his stories were so completely explicit explorations of symbolism and the Kabbalah and the Tarot and other ideas like this, that there was almost not a story left. It was just basically almost like a treatise. Mm-hmm. The Grant Morrison is another guy, a guy from Scotland, who's also done some really important work along these lines. Describes himself as a chaos magician. Neil Gaiman, who created the Sandman, also wrote an excellent book that I really recommend to everyone called American Gods, which is a story about these gods from the old world all come to America as basically as illegal immigrants and try to reestablish themselves in the new world. A really tremendous book that I recommend to everyone. Fascinating, tons of information, and also very, very funny and entertaining. There's actually a comic book now, believe it or not, called The Illuminati, and I've got it in my hands right now, and basically it's a story that revolves around the most powerful figures of the Marvel Comics universe, creating this secret society to to shape the superhuman world, as they call it.
Okay.
So very interesting. So these ideas, as they also are seeping into the popular culture, particularly Da Vinci Code, National Treasure, a lot of things like this, are very much alive in the comics, and probably to a much greater extent than in the popular culture, which to me is becoming increasingly narrow and mindless in a lot of ways. It's very difficult for me because movies today, I wonder where the story is. There's a lot of effects and there's a lot of, wonderful, beautiful people on screen, and there's nothing going on, in the narrative.
Yeah.
That's a little sideways, but sure.
There's
a lot of this stuff going on.
I see what you mean, but once in a while, something really pops out at you, and actually, what I've discovered in the recent years, because I was very at first kind of not anti-Hollywood in that way, but kind of everything was just a gloss over, there's no content there, nothing is going on. But then when you actually are becoming more aware of the symbolism of the ancient mythologies, of the stories that are retelling or retold, you suddenly realize that, wait a minute, there are some incredible stories that are being told basically on the movie screen by some of these big companies, and there are some very talented people, writers, and those who design the sets and the kind of symbols that they use, and the everything from color scheme to the CG design, the technological stuff. But I mean, there's some really brilliant artists there who seems to be very aware of this. Would you agree on that?
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because there's a great crossover between people in Hollywood and people in the comics industry, and it's a two-way street. I'll give you an example. The Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula movie, the production design was done by one of the people I talk about in the book, a guy named Mike Mignola, who is very much a very serious student of occult history. Created a character called Hellboy, which was also made in a movie by Guillermo del Toro, who did Pan's Labyrinth. And he also, Mike Mignola, did the cartoon of Atlantis, which was done by Disney. So there is a tremendous back and forth going on. I mean, you've had a lot of movies by Alan Moore based on his comic books. You've had V for Vendetta, you've had Constantine, you've had The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and you've had From Hell.
Yeah.
And now there's also one made based on The Watchmen that's coming out in the next year or so.
Interesting.
So I think that there are a lot of people in Hollywood who grew up as comics fans, and maybe subconsciously sort of started picking up on a lot of this material. But I would argue in my next book that Hollywood has been very much steeped in symbolism and mysticism and secret society material since the very early days.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
Clear.
So, I mean, we could again talk about fairly new phenomenons like let's take The Matrix for instance. Again, very comic book type character in those movies. I think even that when the Wachowski brothers were developing the series, they spawned their ideas on a lot of Japanese kind of the manga type characters basically.
Well, again, I mean, those guys are serious hardcore comic fans. They started their own comic company called Burly Man Entertainment. When they were developing the Matrix, the first Matrix, which to me is the real Matrix, they enlisted two comic book artists, one named Jeff Darrow and one named Steve Scroce, to basically do the entire movie as a comic book. That's how they pitched the movie. Neo is essentially sort of a cyberpunk Superman. But there's a very interesting backstory here. A year before The Matrix came out, there was another movie that has a very strong comic book tie-in called Dark City. Did you see Dark City?
Oh, yeah, I just rewatched that actually just a couple of days ago. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's the same story essentially as The Matrix. The difference is that The Matrix is based in science fiction and Dark City is sort of based in mysticism.
Yeah.
He has these mystical inborn powers. The director of that movie was a guy named Alex Proyas, who did the Crow movie, which has a sort of a tragic backstory when Brandon Lee was killed on set.
Yeah.
An accidental gunfire. That was kind of a strange story. But that was also based on a comic book series. The Crow was originally a comic book series, which had these sort of occult underpinnings. But not a lot of people know this. Those stories are very much the same, and a lot of people were like, well, the Matrix is just a rip-off of Dark City. But not a lot of people know that they had the same producer, a guy named Andrew Mason of Hollywood.
There we go. Oops. That's nice.
Really kind of and that's the actual truth. Andrew Mason was the producer of both Dark City and The Matrix.
And I think they were down in Australia for the shooting of both of those movies in the same studios. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. Correct. So there's obviously something going on behind the scenes.
That's right. Exactly. But again, I mean, rewatching a movie like The Matrix again, I get a powerful, sense that this is a Christian story. I mean, look at the entire series and look at how the character is developed, what happens to him, and what happens to him in the end. I mean, I see it basically today as a retelling of the Christian story with a lot of course, Gnostic elements put in there and a lot of Buddhist ideas and so forth. But again, the idea of the sacrifice in order to, save the rest is a very Christian story. So, I mean, in that sense...
It's pre-Christian. It comes from Egyptian religion, really. I mean...
Sure, yeah, exactly. If we go back, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, can talk about this on the subscriber section, but I really believe that the Christian stories are really based in Egyptian stories.
Yeah.
And there's almost sort of a giveaway to this in the book of John when Lazarus is raised by Jesus with his sisters Mary and Martha. Now, this is to me, it's a very clear counterpart to the resurrection of Osiris.
Yeah.
And there's the etymological link between Isis and Mary through Isis Mary, which is the star of the sea. And actually, this is something that not a lot of people realize, but the other sister, Martha, the Hebrew name Martha means mistress of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the exact definition of the name Nephthys, which is Isis' sister in the mythology.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I personally believe that these stories, and that's not to say there's not a very profound spiritual truth there, or
Sure.
spiritual reality. I don't believe this is a literal truth there. I believe that this is something that plays out in another realm, in another way of the world that we're not quite really in tune to yet. But we sense very powerfully throughout these religions and these mythologies.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think?
But let me just say that Dark City it's interesting because you're right, the Matrix is very powerfully Gnostic, and these guys were very clear about that. They made it very clear that they were drawing upon Gnostic texts. Dark City is almost more a much more pagan version of that. There's a lot of mythological sexual symbolism. Shell Beach. Not a lot of people realize this, but the Greek word for shell is also the word for vagina.
Mm-hmm.
So that there's a lot of fertility symbolism in this in that film. A lot of elemental symbolism.
Mm.
So the two films are almost like bookends. That you have the Gnostic and perhaps I sort of hesitate to say pagan. I prefer the term solar because what you will find in a lot of these films is that it's not exactly pagan. It's actually solar, and it ties back to the religious systems of the late Roman Empire.
Well, exactly, that's right. I mean, I see today Christianity as a solar worshipping religion, basically, and you're absolutely right. When you look at a movie like Dark City, for instance, it's very Apollonian in that sense. It's the movie gravitates towards the ending where it is all about the returning of the sun. Again, they're in the dark city, they're in the night environment, all the entire movie, and it isn't until the end until Murdoch or Marduk returns the sun, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting too if you see Chronicles of Narnia, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe film. I mean, that film to me is it's so blatantly solar. I call it sun worship for beginners. They say that it's this Christian allegory, but all the symbolism in that entire movie, from beginning to end, is all from ancient sun worship, particularly the Mithraic mysteries.
Yeah, sure.
I don't think that's an accident.
No.
The lion was the symbol of the sun. There's so many. His colors are red and gold, which are solar colors. His resurrection comes with the sunrise. It occurs in a place that very much looks like Stonehenge, which was a solar calendar. I mean, it's pretty blatant to me, and I'm just fascinated by the fact that it was sold as a Christian movie when it's so blatantly solarism.
That's right. I mean, C.S. Lewis, good friend to J.R. Tolkien at the time, real, as I would call it, they were steeped in really a Christian background, and you're absolutely right there with the fact that the lion is basically the lion of the tribe of Judah, the return of Jesus. The entire story there is very Christian, so no doubt about that.
This is something I really analyze frame by frame in the book on movies that will be coming out next year. Because when I break it down, I don't think there will be any doubt. My only regret in doing